This month on Bat Lessons, we're jumping back into our discussions on The Batman, the 2022 Matt Reeves movie starring Robert Pattinson. Last episode, we talked about some general thoughts and all the acting performances. This time, we're talking about cinematography, realism, and some of our thoughts about a potential sequel. Our in-person recording session over Thanksgiving went great. We look forward to getting that episode out to you soon. We haven't recorded our listener feedback episode, so you still have a little bit of time to let us know what you think about the show or tell us about your first Batman memory. Without further ado, on to the show.
Let's talk about cinematography because I want to desperately.
Okay, I loved it.
That's a take. Do you want to talk about that at all before I get into why I don't?
So I would say like the two elements of the cinematography that I enjoyed a lot were like it was really dark. They had some interesting angles where it was much more a movie that was made in this decade where like GoPros are common and you can like stick those on the sides of cars or whatever. Yep. So like the car chase, the fact that like the camera is in a spot where you can see behind the car, but you can also see the penguin at the same time, I think was a really solid move. Yep. And like some of that stuff worked very well. I would also point to, I guess in my perspective, a really bad cinematography choice, which was to do this like self-facing GoPro camera on Batman when he jumped off the building. He did the
I think that's awful.
Yeah. I thought that was really...
It's one of the things I'm going to complain about.
Yeah, I thought that it was in line with some of the other choices they made, but was not a good one.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I really want to touch on that I loved, and I haven't seen a lot of people talk about, I guess, is the hallway scene. When the only lighting in the scene is the gunshots. And it's really reminiscent of like Darth Vader in...
Oh, sure.
In Rogue One.
Rogue One.
Yeah, and how the hallway is only lit up by the blaster shots and the lightsaber.
Yeah.
And it just creates this different type of atmosphere for the battle, and it lined up with the music very well. That was probably top 5 scenes from the whole movie that I really loved.
Yeah, incredibly successful. I think that shot is incredible. I highly encourage you to go watch those Dolby interviews because they talk a lot about why they chose to shoot the movie the way they do. Okay. But there is some jargon, and I don't think it would be an episode of Bat Lessons if there wasn't some history and there wasn't some lessons to talk about, because some of this might whiz over your head if you watch the video without knowing it ahead of time. And
I'm really excited to hear this portion because like I know enough about like cinematography, sound, and music to like be dangerous. But I'm nothing compared to you, and I always like hearing your take on movies because it gets really deep in these areas that I barely pay attention to, because you focus a lot more on the mechanics of how to make a movie, whereas I just sit and absorb it and just have the feels, you know. So I'm very excited for you to take over and just run this section.
The technology is super, super interesting to me, and I think for Matt Reeves, he is deeply, deeply sort of involved with the technology as well. And I think that drives a lot of the decisions he makes. Are you familiar with what anamorphic film is?
I'm familiar with the term. Is it, just give me 1 second. Is it anamorphic? Yeah. Is that when the film, is it like scope filming where that's how you accomplish like the wide lens?
Yeah. It's one of the ways that they
I have a scope lens
in
in my living room, actually, and it's for anamorphic film.
Okay, very cool. Yeah. So most film throughout history has been shot on 35 millimeter film, and what 35 millimeter film is referring to the size of the frame diagonally. So if you measure from one corner to another, it's 35 millimeters. But beyond just being 35 millimeters, they standardized, the Academy did the
aspect ratio
film.
Right?
Yeah, they standardized on an aspect ratio called a full Academy gate, and that is 1.375 to 1, which is like a really weird number, but it's super close to 4:3. which is like the size that CRT televisions used to be.
It's really standard.
It's a little bit wider than it is tall, but it's very close to square. And in like the 30s and 40s, like all movies were shot in 4:3 or 1.375:1, and they were shot in full Academy gate because that's what the film stock that they standardized used. And like some really snooty movies now are filmed in this way. So Grand Budapest Hotel was shot in full Academy gate. Zack Snyder's Justice League was shot in full Academy gate. He made a big deal about, my original vision is that it needed to be 4:3 because people think it makes them more artistic, which is funny because like I love Grand Budapest Hotel and I think it's a piece of art, and Zack Snyder's Justice League is what it is. But like to like poke on that a little bit, when you used to buy DVDs, you had the widescreen version and the standard version. Right, and it was basically about whether or not you wanted black bars when you watched it, if your TV was big enough. Yes.
And movies that were being filmed at the widescreen, which is like 16:9-ish usually. Depends, right? But it's roughly that. And what they did was called pan and scan, which I know you know a lot more. This is me talking to the audience. Was pan and scan, which meant that they clipped off sections of what was filmed to be able to zoom in and take the black bars off. I think there, like in my mind, there's like an interesting distinctional difference between, for me, what are standard aspect ratio movies that are caused by pan and scan, which are just generally worse, compared to a movie that was filmed at that size that would actually potentially show you more top and bottom in the film at once.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating. We're going to get into it a little bit here in a minute.
Yeah.
That there's a difference between sort of like information in terms of like composition of the frame. Yeah. So when you say it shows more, right, like there could be more people because it's like zoomed out more. Right. Like there's stuff that's cropped off the side and bottom. But when we talk about like more information, like resolution, like in terms of like detail that you can resolve, there may or may not be more. And so in the 50s, right, they decided to start making movies wider and wider. And if you've ever watched the credits in movies where it comes before, or even if you've watched credits all the way to the end, you might see brand names like CinemaScope or Panavision, and you wonder what those things are. These are the lens creators that invented the technology that we call anamorphic, and they're the ones that decided or created the way we can make this wider. But films did not stop shooting on Academy Gate 35 millimeter film. They continued to be shot on 35 millimeter Academy Gate film all the way until the early 2000s when we started shooting movies digitally. So how do you take this 4:3 picture and turn it into one that's really wide? Well, you do it in an anamorphic sense. This is not the only way to do it, but this is the way it was done for a long time. Was you would take the lens, and basically what it does is it focuses, right? It captures the light in a sort of compressed way. So you take a really, really wide field and you focus that down so it fits on the 35 millimeter. And if you were to project that 35 millimeter film, everyone would be really, really tall and skinny.
It stretches. It's a vertical stretch distortion. Yeah.
It is a horizontally squeezed distortion. Potato. But the light that it's capturing is horizontally squeezed, is the way that it works. Yeah. And then when you go to project it again, you have an inverse lens that does the horizontal stretch.
And that's what I have.
Right? Yeah, to get it back to where it was. And that's how widescreen was done for a very, very, very long time. And the benefit of shooting widescreen that way is that you keep all of the possible resolution you can. The more picture that is put onto the film, or the more square millimeter of film you have per picture, the more definition there is, the more detail there is. There's another way to do widescreen called Superscope 35, and the person that is famous for using Superscope 35 is James Cameron, which is where you take 35 millimeter and you just crop it off the top and bottom. So you have a lens that just covers up the picture. Yeah. And so like you're literally putting a black bar at the top and the bottom on the film. And he did that for...
That's the point that I was going to make about information and like and like a different way to say what you're saying. And you can correct me if this is not right. But is
no worries.
The more light that hits the film, then the more information you have. And that's
right.
And that's a higher definition that you can project out onto the screen. And so this is all driven by the standard film size, which is a 35 millimeter. If they could like change film size all whenever they wanted to, then it wouldn't be a problem. But since they're stuck on 35 millimeters, because that's all of the projectors in the world are 35 millimeter at the time, then they were doing this critical thinking to come around, like to problem solve,
to try to figure out how to make it wide
with as much information as possible.
So why in the 90s does James Cameron decide to use a method that uses less film, right? So they're actually capturing less light by chopping off the top and bottom, right? They're using less of that 35 millimeter frame to represent their picture to get something that's wide, right? He does that with Terminator. He does that with Titanic, right? Why does he choose to do that? Because like you just said, the more of the film I can use, the more detail I can get, the better the picture is going to be. Well, the reason is because this anamorphic trick where we're like squeezing the light generates a lot of distortion, and some of this distortion is like stuff you actually might appreciate. So like lens flares. If you take your iPhone and you point it at the sun, right, the flare that you're going to get is going to be circles. So you might have concentric circles of like one really big, like, you know, image of the sun that is offset from the actual sun, and then another one that's smaller, and then another one that's even smaller, right? But they're perfect circles. In an anamorphic, because you're stretching the picture, you're squeezing the picture and stretching it back out again, the lens flare is this massive line. So you'll actually have the circle, pinprick of light, but then you'll also have a big line across the whole frame of the picture. And that's because of the way that the glass is interacting with that light, and it's a distortion.
Yeah.
And so like J.J. Abrams is like notorious and like famous for like doing these lens flares that are fake, right?
Yeah.
And so you have movies that are shot not anamorphic, and then all of a sudden there's a digital lens flare that's over the thing that's like doing the line across the whole screen. Or sometimes he does shoot anamorphic, right? And that is probably the distortion that like most people are familiar with. But there are other distortions that come with anamorphic, which especially when they're first doing it in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where they don't really know how to make the glass yet. And that is that focus falls off the further from the center of the frame you get.
Yeah.
So you can have like in film, you have lenses that will do different depths of field, which is what they call depth of field, which is like how of the distance away from the picture is in focus. Right. So you could imagine one lens that is capable of doing about 10 feet in focus at a time. And you can move those 10 feet. So like maybe starting at 5 feet from the camera and going to 15 feet, all of those objects are in focus. And then you move it to say, okay, everything at 20 feet is in focus to 30 feet, but at 35, it's not, right? And anamorphic has, by definition, usually has a fairly shallow depth of field. So, you know, you might only have 4 feet or 3 feet that are in focus, right? So that's one thing that happens. But also what happens is that's at the center of the picture. So like if I'm in the middle of the frame, my face is in focus, but everything falls off to the side. So something could be the same distance to the camera. Like my hand, if it's on the right-hand side of the screen, might be only 6 inches closer to the camera than I am. But it might be out of focus because the way that the glass works, that's just imperfect, right? Like the further from the center, the less focus it has.
Yeah, I can add to this as well. So as far as depth of field goes, like I think people my age probably used Instagram when it was fairly new, and that was one of the filters that you used to have like a line of in focus and like stuff that was out of focus around it, which was to emulate that depth of field thing. It's common in like phones now, especially when they have like multiple cameras. And like I think the easiest way to kind of like describe that in a scenario would be like you're trying to take a picture of like a Coke can on a table, and you can see the Coke can is in focus, and like the table that is at the same depth away from you, the wood grain is also in focus, but the further you go behind that, the wood grain would go out of focus, and the closer you come from the can, the wood grain on the table would be out of focus as well. And to show that like the depth of field is exactly where that can is, and no more or less. Whereas like there are other like really wide depths of field where you take a picture and like everything is in focus, but it is flat. Like you can't tell how far things are back in the distance. Right. It's like portrait mode on your phone. Usually like it tries to make you in focus, and like the stuff behind you is out of focus. That's depth of field.
There's all kinds of like in film and photography, they have different ways of describing the characteristics of that blur, right? So like the quality of a blur, if it's particularly pleasing and soft and circular, you might hear someone call that bokeh, right? That's something that they're intentionally doing. They want focus. Things that are distant behind you to be out of focus. It's pleasing to the eye. They call that bokeh, right? But with an anamorphic, frame, you have something that is unintentionally happening, that sort of falls outside the rule set that Brian is describing, where everything that is sort of on the same plane should be in focus, and everything that's further should be out of focus. And I can
touch on that too.
It's blurring. Go ahead.
There are two. So I'm talking about the lenses that I have out in my living room, but they are from like a very, very old, like mid 60s film projector that we had at the movie theater. And when we got rid of that projector to replace it with like a fresh new digital one, I got to keep the lenses. But that was a real thing. Like when you run the film through and then you put the lens on the front that matched the film that you were playing on. If it was going to be 4x3, you do the flat lens. If it was going to be, we called it scope, but if it was going to be a scope, you'd put the longer lens on it, which does the anamorphic. And every single time you started playing a movie, the first thing you do is you twist this knob to adjust that depth, and you would be trying to find the focus point in what you're watching and get that as close to the middle as possible so that you don't have anything that's wildly out of focus. You're not going to have everything in focus, but if you put the focus line at the bottom, you know that the top is going to be much worse than if you put it in the middle, whereas the top and bottom are just like half as bad. And so that's my experience with that, and like the imperfection in the lens, like you were describing, how you have to like find that center line to kind of balance out the out of focusness.
And the thing is that like we've gotten, even like today when we're shooting on film, or sorry, on digital, where we can have these perfect captures at the sensor that are perfectly tack sharp, like you're still fighting the glass, right? We still use glass lenses, but the technology has gotten much, 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 much better. We have lenses that are perfectly in focus across the frame when you want it to be and not when you don't. And we don't have focus fall off, so things to the sides of the image end up blurry. And we don't have what they call vignetting, where things to the corners or to the sides of the frames get darker.
Yeah.
And it has been a criticism of some people of late that movies have been too perfect and too tack sharp, and the wording that they'll sometimes use is like sterile. It feels like, especially because so much of the movies end up being digital, right? Where we have these digital composites where it has to be perfectly in focus, right? Because you need to be able to cut out the blue screen behind them, or because we're going to need to put something digital into the frame that is by definition made by a computer, and we have a really hard time emulating things like motion blur and focus fall off and things like that. Because it needs to mesh as well as possible, we get the cleanest, tack sharp, most perfect image we can in the camera, so that it composites well, right? And so this is a criticism that people have of the Marvel movies, that they all feel kind of cookie cutter and sterile. And Matt Reeves, I think, is intentionally sort of like pushing back against it. So when you hear him talk about the cinematography in these Dolby videos, and in various interviews that he's done since the movie, they talk about going and trying to find these misfit lenses. Like they are intentionally looking for bad lenses, right? That are capturing things in a poor way on purpose. So they're looking for things with focus fall off. They're looking for things that vignette and have all kinds of distortion. They want these crazy sort of lights. And they even went further than that, right? So beyond just like choosing these bad lenses, after they edited the movie, this movie was shot on digital, by the way, on a 6K camera. So they shot the whole thing on digital. It's a very, very clean picture, aside from the lenses that are in front. After they edited the whole movie, they actually did a print of the movie onto 35 millimeter film, and then did a capture of that again back to digital. And so, they even did a third cut of the movie where they do an interpositive, which I'm not going to explain, but like, because we don't have time. But they did a print the same way you would have with a camera. You're going through a color process the way a film camera would have. And then they went shot by shot through the movie. And in their digital editing software, they said, do we want the digital version of the shot, or do we want the film version, or do we want the interpositive? Dang. And they would choose which one they actually wanted to use. Because, when you go to the film and back, you get grain. Or if you go to interpositive and back, you get different color distortion. And they very, very much are trying to make it look like a 1970s movie.
Right. Yeah.
And they're successful, right?
Oh, hell yeah.
And it is beautiful. I think it is indulgent. I think is the right word for it.
Yeah.
It brings something to the movie in many cases until it doesn't. I think it can be distracting.
I think I would say that this could be argued on both sides pretty easily.
I I think it's really hard for me to sort of explain my feeling of like, I had this uneasiness where I felt like I could tell where like they're moving from one shot to another in the same scene where they're choosing to use a lens that is sharper because they need to for that shot, or they're using a lens that has more lens flare because they need it for that shot and the next one they don't, or they've chosen to, I can't honestly say that I could pick those out. Like if I was trying to go shot for shot to say this is the one where they did a digital composite, because they did have special effects in this movie, and you can tell that the film grain is less, and the next one in the same scene doesn't, right? Or I don't know if I could actually do that, but I did have this feeling of like they were changing things up as I was going. I had this sort of unease about like the picture quality was changing, and that did bother me in a way that like maybe it wouldn't someone who isn't trying to pay attention to those things.
Yeah. If you're not seeing it,
but I think
it's not bothering you. But that, like, I guess what you're describing kind of seems like when you're watching good CGI versus like bad CGI, like when you notice like
totally
that doesn't look right, that breaks your suspension of disbelief a little bit. You go, oh, I'm in a theater.
Exactly. I think they were so focused on craft. They're so nerdy about it, like I am. Like they care about this stuff so much that they indulged themselves, right? They decided we're going to do this cool thing because it's cool. And a couple times it sort of breaks the veil, right? And you're focused on the craft instead of the film. And they do it a few times. And you brought one up, actually. I'm glad you did, which is the hard mounts. So they made a purpose. They purposefully wanted to do all of the action sequences even when they were using digital effects and composites, and do it in a physical way. So like everywhere a camera is, it could have plausibly been. And so when you're talking about a car chase, right? They wanted it to have a visceralness and a physicality of like, there's no sort of like third party observer where you have a camera that is like in a wall, which like is a thing that happens in the Christopher Nolan movies of like, there are cameras in places that they could never have been if there wasn't a crane or a helicopter, or if they were actually in a physical place.
I get what you're saying.
Right?
So like kind of like a sitcom, there's no way that there could be a camera there because there's a wall missing specifically so you can film it. Yeah. I got you.
That's right. They cut away half the building and you're looking into the other half, right? It's kind of weird. And they very purposefully did things in a very physical way. And they get so into this idea, which is a good one, right? Of hard mounts. And there's a moment in this Dolby video when he's talking about like, they started from the shots backwards and they just said, where are all the places on this car you can hard mount a car? And they tried every one. Okay, hard mount a car, camera here. We're going to hard mount. Yeah, there and there and there and there. And they go through 50 different places of where you can hard mount a camera, and they're just getting all these shots. And then they edit it together because it meets this criteria of this rule of like, it needs to be physically based. And then I'm just in this movie and they're like, we're going to do another shot where like we're looking out the back of this car. And the moment that you cited where they had the hard mount on his head of like, well, it's a little stupid. Like it's breaking the sort of mold of like, they've got really into this idea of like, we're going to do this thing because it has this quality to it and we like that quality, and they do it just like 20% too much, right? They get really into the idea. He talks about it in the video as well. He's really excited about Batman coming out of the shadows, right? And there's multiple scenes in this movie where we're looking at a dark shadow and we hear the boots and we go clump, clump, clump. And the first time
Darth
it's really
Vader,
cool.
right?
And then the second or third time, but like the third time you're like, this is a 3-hour long movie, and then they do it with the car, and there's the shadow and the car turns on and the engine, it goes growls, and like they're just gushing about the sound design.
And the Zodiac does that, or not Zodiac. Ooh, that was a good slip. The Joker does that too. In the beginning, in the mayor, like it's all dark, and then like suddenly he's there. He came out of the shadows, right?
Oh, Riddler, yes.
Oh, man, a double slip. Yeah, Riddler,
okay.
Not Joker, and not Zodiac. Riddler.
Yeah, so there's this theme that they repeat over and over and over again of things coming out of the shadows, and it is a strong idea, and they execute on it well. But I think they've indulged themselves, that they think this idea is so good that they do it one time too many. Right? Like for me, I've heard people gush about the Batmobile first appearance, and like to me, it is almost immersion breaking because we have gone to such great lengths to like make this feel real, and like all of a sudden there's a car with a blue flame coming out the back. And I'm like, really? Like that moment didn't work for me.
On that thing, there's actually like a little tidbit in the trivia about how I don't even know if I put in my notes or not, Yeah, so Matt Reeves, he said, I like the idea of the car itself as a horror figure, making an animalistic appearance to really scare the hell out of people Batman's pursuing.
Which is a cool idea.
And there is absolutely a horror genre aspect to this movie.
I think that's true. And parts of it work.
Yeah.
But that very first shot of like it's coming out of the shadow and like I don't know if he like pops the clutch and it kind of goes, it's a little weird, like it kind of like a false start.
Mm-hmm.
And it happens with the music too. I think the sound design again is incredible, and there's so many things that are going so right. There's one moment in the movie that blows my mind of like they were using an angle grinder to like cut the lock off of a door. I think it's when Batman's coming back to the 30 Below or whatever the name of the club is, like the third time. It's right before the scene where there's the scene in the hallway where it's lit by the gunshots.
I think he's chopping through the power lines.
Oh, that's what he's doing. That's right. But like, it's this shrill screeching that's so loud, and the pitch perfectly matches with the music that comes in afterwards. And you're like, that's such a cool sound design moment where like the sound effect turns into the music. Yeah. And that works so well, but like at the same time, it is a very loud movie.
Yeah.
And like they lean into like these visceral sound effect moments of like they want you to feel it. And like by the end of that third hour, we're in the third act, we're like, I don't understand why we're in Madison Square Garden right now. And like it's just relentlessly loud. I'm like, you've given me 20% too much or 10% too much. It's like just past the line of like And so from a filmmaking perspective, I think that's my problem with it, is that like they have these really, really, really cool ideas and they are so focused on their craft and they have so many cool things they want to do, and they just do it just a bit too much and it feels indulgent. I think that's the word I have. So that's my feeling on the cinematography and the sound. The other thing on the music is that not just the song from Nirvana, but the Giacchino score. Yeah. He actually wrote that song first too. And this is another idea that you can tell when he's in the interview that Matt Reeves loves that like they started with that and they worked outward. And that is cool because the performance is informed by the music, and supposedly like Reeves had it, the Giacchino score like on his iPod and is like listening to it, and like, the lighting, the other thing that apparently they decided like the color red is something that they wanted to play with very early on. And that's cool, except I feel like the theme is really strong, but it doesn't go many places. Like there's only that one note. It goes ba 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 ba, and like by the time we're on the third hour, like we're just doing that theme again. To
me, it's really reminiscent of the Imperial March, actually.
Sure, that's fair. I think what works about the Imperial March is that it's amongst like 4 other also hummable and recognizable tunes by John Williams. And like, this is the only song in the whole movie, besides the Nirvana song, right? Same with like the like they get really into the rain. Like they came up with cool ways to shoot the rain. Like they smudged Vaseline on the lens so that the water would stick to the lens. And like, it's so cool. And also like, it's always raining in Gotham. Yeah. Like there's like 4 scenes in this movie where it's raining and you're like, is this Seattle? Or is it we just liked it and so we kept doing it?
That was supposed to be a choice to show how like oppressive the city was. Is that like it's just constantly raining, like nothing.
And I can appreciate that, And I think again, I should reiterate, I love this movie.
Sure,
it's a very good movie. But I think there's a lot of choices where they get into an idea that they really like it, and they're like, we're going to do it over and over and over and over and over again. And I'm thinking, if they did it once, then I think they're making a statement about the rain. But it's amongst all these other things where they've kind of leaned into this idea that they really like so hard, but that feels there's actually like another layer on that rain that's kind of interesting.
Like Batman, he becomes Bruce Wayne. He goes up to meet with Alfred, and he puts his sunglasses on because like the light's bright. Like he looks over and is like, and he squints and he puts his sunglasses on because he just became nocturnal, like he said in his like beginning narration. And it's raining all the time. And then at the very end of the movie, they have shown this resolution that the oppression has lifted because the rain has stopped. And the sun comes out, and he can look directly into the sun, and he's not squinting.
Interesting. Yeah. That's cool symbolism for sure.
Yeah.
That's pretty much all the thoughts I had about cinematography and music. Did you have any other thoughts about music? And
there was one other tidbit on the music that I enjoyed learning about, was that like you were saying, they tried to match up all the beats with the music. So like all the visual beats with the music. So like even when he's walking at the pace of the music. And usually when he's walking, every fourth step is a harder step than the others in the sound effect as it connects to the soundtrack.
I didn't know that. That's
cool.
I
thought that was cool.
It's almost rhythmic. He's making a beat himself.
Yeah, or like that incredible hallway scene where they're shooting and stuff. All the shots line up with the music and stuff.
It's so cool.
It's so good.
That is a triumph.
Yeah,
like I get salty about like them overdoing things about their craft. They are so talented.
Yeah,
like the fact that they are doing these things that no one else is doing is incredible. Like they deserve all of the praise in the world for zigging when everyone else is zagging. So even if I don't appreciate certain parts of it, it's so unique and it stands out. You know.
So I want to take this in a particular direction.
Sure.
So we're talking about cinematography. You're talking about wanting to make it look like a 70s movie, etc. And I think all of that plays into this question of like, when does this take place? And I have some like kind of geeky thoughts about it, which is like the stylization of the world, the universe that they've created is like 80s New York City, like kind of the worst crime of the time, very dark, lots of pollution, etc. However, they have like bleeding edge, possibly even futuristic technology, which is something that I really appreciated in Batman the Animated Series. So for homework in like a previous episode, you asked me to watch for an upcoming one, you asked me to watch the 1943 serial for Batman. And we'll talk about how awful that is another time. But like watching it really connected the dots for me on some of the modern Batman stuff. So like Batman the Animated Series, I now understand why they're wearing suits and fedoras. And why when they're in cars, they're all like these really, really old, like stylized cars, but they have like computers and stuff. And it is like playing homage back to the early, like the first time Batman was on the silver screen in the 43 serial. And like, I kind of see that a little bit in that the way they've stylized like a lot of the cars or a lot of the buildings or whatever is like a time that's passed. Like 80s would be 40 years ago. But they have this super modern technology, like the contact lens that's a camera, you know, and stuff like that. So my, I guess, response to my own question of like, when does this take place is kind of like it takes place in a timeline that we don't live on. Like it's very much its own universe. So it's both the 1980s and the 2020s, but also neither of them because it's in Gotham.
I agree with that observation that like Batman in a way is a man out of time and a character out of time because he was created in the 30s, right? And so when you go back and you read the origins, it has all of these trappings of this moment that it's a bygone era, right? And so he's constantly recontextualized and it is impossible to make it fully modern and not backward looking in a way. And so you're right. When you are seeing the Burton Batman, it is hearkening back to the 30s and 40s because that is where Batman comes from. Right. And I think this is hearkening back to the 70s and 80s, not just because Matt Reeves is like super into movies from that time, which I think part of it is, especially sort of mystery thrillers of that era he's into, but also because I think that is an era that he thinks speaks to the social commentary and speaks to the themes that he's trying to show, right? Like the way we like to think of like a broken New York City that is crime ridden and overrun and needs fixing is a moment that like has passed, right? We don't think of New York City that way anymore. And so when we think about crime and cities that are sort of off the rails or that need this sort of like savior figure, it is something that is backward looking. So like, yeah, you're right. Like we do have technology. He does have like there's cell phones all over the movie. There's the like Batman FaceTimes with the Riddler, but like the movie is awash in orange, which is like of high pressure sodium lights, which like street lights don't use anymore. Like they're all LEDs, right?
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that at all.
Yeah, I wish it was some observation that I had that was super clever, but Matt Reeves talks about it in one of the interviews he did. But yeah, it is out of time, and I think I think that's really cool for sure. One of the things that Kevin Smith said on Fat Man on Batman is that like Christopher Nolan, if Christopher Nolan made Batman real and brought Batman into the real world, then what Matt Reeves has done is he's made Gotham real, right? I think he has taken special attention and care and detail to like making the city feel like something that could plausibly exist. Like I love, and I think in a lot of ways they're better movies, the Christopher Nolan movies, but it's like Batman's in Chicago, right? Like it is not, they don't take care to try to make Gotham something that is real. And in like, you know, the Burton verse and the Schumacher verse, like Gotham is very distinct, but again, it does not feel real. It feels like a cartoon, or a comic in a way. And this is, I think, the first time we've seen someone say, well, what if a city was broken in this way? And that's really cool.
Yeah. That does raise another question that I have, which is, so you're talking about like how real it is and stuff. And that's one of the things that I really liked about this movie in general is that like it's high tech but lo-fi. Everything is plausible.
Sure.
And this was the first time we've seen like the sweaty Batman. Because Christopher Nolan's Batman, like when he takes the mask off, the paint around his eyes are just like suddenly gone. And his hairstyle is like usually pretty good, and he's dry, you know. Whereas like this Batman, like when he takes the mask off, like they made it a lot more real. Where like when after he's being Batman, he gets on his motorcycle, you can see that like there's this sweaty, nasty like black paint around or makeup around his eyes, like that's like bleeding running down on his cheeks. Yeah, is running. Or like there are a couple of times where like he's on the motorcycle or he's like going into a building and he's clearly carrying like a rucksack that or a backpack or something that has the Batman suit inside of it, because he's like, I can't be Batman right now. He goes into a building and then changes, you know, and then he becomes Batman. He did that at when he's going into Falcone's at the very end, the Iceberg Lounge. He goes in like as a dude.
Yes. There's multiple times where they're trying to call out the ridiculousness of what he's doing, where like it rhymes, right? He shows up at the door and knocks on it as Batman, and they say, "Who are you?" Right? And then he does it again. He has the lines are identical. He says the same things, but he's dressed as him, right? Yeah. And it sort of highlights how stupid, like in no other movie. And in fact, I don't like it because I like my Batman to be mysterious, but I accept it as they're trying to realize it. Right? In no world does Batman show up to the front door of an establishment and knock, right? Batman like shows up inside and you have no idea how he got there, like, because we don't need to, because he's a ninja. And there is a realism to that I do appreciate. Likewise, like, you know, he jumps off the building and we have the hard mount shot that we both hate. But like after that, like he pulls his parachute and like hits a bridge and like gets messed up and like seriously hurt, and like that's a moment that like in Spider-Man is played for laughs, and like I did kind of have a nervous laugh, but it's not supposed to be funny. Like this dude gets like jacked, you know, up, there's a realism to like he doesn't really know what he's doing. He's not really superhuman.
Your
right?
three doors thing actually I think is learning. We're seeing him learn. He goes up and he knocks as Batman. It doesn't work. He goes in as Bruce Wayne and it like kind of works, but he was very depressed at the time. And the third time he snuck in, and I think that's him learning that like sneaking in was by far the easiest, and from now on I'm just going to sneak into buildings. Yeah,
it's a cool idea for sure.
Yeah. So then running on this plausibility thing, what did you think of the vehicles? He rode on a motorcycle most of the time. You kind of stated some of your thoughts about the car in general, but this is like kind of a different context on the question.
The book is one of the main characters of the prequel novel, so I have a hard time divorcing myself because I did read that.
The bike, you mean?
No, the car.
Oh, okay.
The Batmobile.
Got it. Sorry, I thought
he builds the Batmobile in the book.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I didn't.
In the prequel novel, he builds the Batmobile.
Got it. I'm with you.
And so, like, despite the fact that I don't like that it blows blue flame out its butt, like that's probably the only part I don't really like. I think it works. I think the idea that's kind of a hot rod. It's not a tank, right? It is something that a dude built in his garage, right?
Yeah.
I like that. I like that he rides a motorcycle. There's nothing special about it. It's just a motorcycle. Yeah, it works for me. I think there is something that's really cool about, like, I have a Batwing, Lego Batwing hanging up on my wall. I have built Batmobiles. I think there is something cool about that playing, you know, an important role as a character in the movies. You know, the Tumbler is part of Batman Begins in a way that I don't think the vehicles are really a part of these movies, and that's okay. Yeah, what about you?
I really dig it. I think these are vehicles that make sense at the beginning of like a Batman storyline is that like as he becomes more advanced or more developed and his technology will get better and his cars will get better and stuff. I see why they might have felt a little bit cornered on doing the flamethrower thing, the I guess jet on the back, because that's like every Batman has had that. It's just a little stupid.
I think
it's not very realistic. I agree.
Yeah, when we have it in the Christopher Nolan movies, it is as a jet engine to be used to help it jump over the, like they hang a lantern on it. They say this thing is a little stupid, but we're going to give you a reason to exist. And in this, we've gone even more. We're trying to make the movie and the setting feel even more realistic, and we have this fantastical element, and we don't try to explain it. And I trip on it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, how do you? It's one of those things. Like as an audience member, you can go, okay, I see why they had to do this. But like, if this was the very first time you'd ever seen Batman, you'd be like, why is there a jet on this car? You know, like I see where they were
Speaking
like,
of things
we
they
have
had
to have a jet. How do we add a jet and make it look realistic? You know.
I hate to change. Like I feel like you're in the middle of something, but this like has this. I feel I have the perfect segue. Like it has sparked a thing.
Do it.
Speaking of things that they felt like they had to have and like don't really fit. The scene with the Joker, where he goes, Riddler is checked into Arkham and he's having the conversation, and there's a person that we don't really see, but he laughs like the Joker, and they're instant friends, and it doesn't move the plot forward in any way. It doesn't really. I guess I'm interested. I shouldn't jump to a conclusion. I'm interested in your take about like what purpose do you feel like that had? Do you feel like you appreciated it?
So to me, the big argument for this is about it sets up a sequel. Like I think that's the only reason that it's there is to be a cliffhanger for you to come back and say, oh, the Riddler's not done. The next movie is going to have the Riddler and the Joker fighting together, or maybe the third movie will. Like they've already said that Robert Pattinson signed for a 3-movie deal, so it would be. And
Matt Reeves has expressed interest in coming back, but he has not said that he's for sure going to do a trilogy.
Yeah,
right?
we know he's done sequels before because he did 2 of the Planet of the Apes. Thank you, the Planet of the Apes movies. So like. It's clear that he's not opposed to doing sequel movies in general, as like a career move. So this has been successful enough that I think Warner Brothers would be just silly to not make another one. And Robert Pattinson's already signed on for 3. So I think there has to be another one. And I think the literal only reason that they had that scene was to as like a marketing move, the cliffhanger to start now building for the 2025 sequel.
Yeah, I hope you're wrong. I just desperately hope you're wrong. To me, the 2 explanations that would be more satisfying than that I have heard thrown around are, one is the studio made him do it because it's the Joker. Like a Batman movie's got to have the Joker.
Yeah,
like everyone,
fair.
Like cigar chomping. Like people don't understand that like the Joker is a part of the Batman universe and not the Batman universe.
Right.
And the other explanation I've heard is that this is Matt Reeves taking him off the table. It's him saying, "Okay, look, yes, of course the Joker exists in my universe, and you're never going to see him again."
But he's already in Arkham.
He's important, right? To the mythos, he's important to my character, and I'm not going to do a movie with him. And I just hope the Dark Knight, okay, is a movie in 2009, right? We are not even, we're barely a past
they
that
had
moment.
the Joker movie also.
So that's what. Let me get there.
Okay,
right?
all right. Sorry.
That's what I'm saying. 2009, right? We're barely a decade past it. Heath Ledger wins an Academy Award for Best Actor for that performance, and we have had 2 Jokers since then, right? Like we had the Joker movie, and then we also had the Joker for the DCEU in Batman vs Superman and Suicide Squad, and like it is just I'm just Jokered out, man. Like I just don't need.
You don't even talk about Jack Nicholson.
You know,
he's the first, right?
Yes, but at least there's time has passed since then. You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying, but like,
I feel so saturated in this moment.
Yeah, if you're stretching out like all of the Batman movies and you say how many of them have a Joker in it, it's more than half of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot. And I think there's something that's so refreshing about the Riddler in that, like, he is someone that we haven't seen that much of. It's people identify with it. They know it, but like it is a new and fresh, exciting take. And like, there are places to go in the Batman universe. And I'm interested to hear what you want from a sequel.
Yes.
But you know, there are places that we can go, like, that we never have before in a movie. Like, we could have a Clayface. We could have, you know, a Court of Owls. We could have, you know, a Mad Hatter. Like, there are places to go, you know, Azaz. Although we did have Azaz in The Birds of Prey that was pretty great. You know, there are villains that we haven't had before. And I think, you know, when I talk about the mood of this movie being so dour, right, and so serious and so dark, and you talk about things like at the end of the movie, you know, the sun comes out and the rain stops and he looks into the sky and we have this hopeful note of like, maybe I'm vengeance is like not the thing we need to go. I'm hoping that we take a shift, that things could get more fantastical, that they could get more positive, and that we could see an evolution of like, maybe we do see someone who becomes over time more comfortable being Bruce Wayne, right? Or, you know, and maybe that's not Millionaire Playboy, but like, you know, that this character has an evolution and goes somewhere and does something different, because I don't think I could handle, as much as I loved this movie, you know, I don't think I could handle another, you know, thriller where like they're trying to do tension for the whole thing and they're trying to do sort of like these themes of like retribution and like anger and like, you know, I want them to go in a different direction. I'm interested to hear what you would hope for.
Yeah, so there's a lot wrapped up in there. Is like I think that, so what are the themes that make this movie relevant? Because this is the first of a trilogy, so they had to land it. So what were the themes that worked? Well, so one of the morals of the story is that vengeance doesn't work. He needs to be justice, not vengeance, right? And that's something that he learned in this movie. Another thing is they're setting him up as a detective, but he was kind of a crappy detective. Like you said, without Catwoman, like kind of connecting the dots for him, he wouldn't have solved this, you know? And so like he's got a lot of room to grow on being a better detective. Corruption in the world like today is a really big theme. And so justice for corruption, that seems like an obvious theme between like the year 2022 and this movie that would like bring audiences to the theater. The anti-establishment sentiment, that's also really huge. It's been huge since like the mid 2010s. And then also,
Occupy Wall Street, right?
Yeah. And so this last one is like touching on joke, but like not joke, is that emo is making a comeback. Like I'm not kidding. Like there are big emo bands that are like reuniting and doing reunion tours and stuff. And like we've got the big When We Were Young tour festival that's coming up in October. You know, like emo's making a comeback. So like the reset, the youth, the realism, like all these things, like stacking the angstiness, they all stack up to like, I see why this movie can happen now and couldn't happen 20 years ago, you know? So then why would they pick the Riddler? So my, I guess, hypothesis on that is that they had, because it had to be something that people would want to see, is they had to pick a villain that they haven't done recently, but everyone knows, which means they have done it before. Sure. And so, and it had to be realistic. So they couldn't do Mr. Freeze, because how does Mr. Freeze with his like ice gun exist in this very realistic world? It doesn't make any sense.
I mean, I desperately want him to, for the record. Like I would love them to try. I want that to happen someday.
I think that's possible in sequels when the technology develops, when he becomes a better detective, etc. But for the first movie, it doesn't land. We don't want to do another Joker. I think that like a Poison Ivy could have worked, but the focus really would have been on like pollution and being green and sustainability and that kind of like global warming angle. So I don't see that landing quite as well. And so like I think the Riddler with like the anti-corruption stuff, like it makes sense of the very small deck that they were able to choose from. Now they've established, they've landed, this is a good movie, and with a sequel, they can do anything. They can do what you're describing and pick characters or villains that we've never seen on in the movies before from the comic books. They could create villains that have never existed before at all. That's possible.
Mm-hmm. They could.
Two-Face
I don't think they will.
could be a
I think
thing.
they care so much about... Sorry, I was just going to say, I think they care so much about the source material. It's so clear in this movie that
that's the smart move, in my opinion.
Sorry, Two-Face.
Yeah, and like Two-Face could happen. That makes sense, but it has to be set up. So Two-Face might be the third movie. The second movie, possibly. It might be the creation of Two-Face in the second movie, but I feel like if you were going to do Two-Face, you'd want that to be the final villain. But I think that you could have a Zaz or a Mad Hatter, or I feel doubtful for Clayface, because that would be like pretty unrealistic.
It'd be so good. He's one of my favorite characters. I get it. Yeah, it's the Mr. Freezes and the Clayfaces probably aren't going to happen, despite the fact that I think they have some of the coolest ideas, and it's because it's not well rooted. Like, I don't have an affection for Killer Croc the way I do for those characters, but again, it's like that's feels out of place with this universe, I think.
Right. And so like with this universe, like I think that the future is bright on what the sequels are going to be like, as long as they can like follow it up. Because like that's one of the discussions we've had with like Star Wars, for example, is like the original trilogy was so good. It's like, how do you follow it up without disappointing people, you know? And like, I've made the bold claim that this is the best Batman movie of all time. What do they have to do to beat that, you know? And they've just set the bar extremely high. What do they do?
They have, and I think, you know, so much of sequels for me are how they continue the phrase, right? Like, how do they play, you know, sequels that are okay but aren't super successful are ones that just do the same thing again. So like Ghostbusters 2 like was a fun movie, but it's just the same thing again, right? Likewise, I think so much of the sequel trilogy, and I know we disagree on the sequel trilogy deeply in some ways, but so much of what didn't work was that they did not try to work together. Like, those individual movies all have strengths and none of them have anything to do with each other. And that's a problem, right?
Yes.
And so
like Whiplash.
I hope that, for sure, and I hope that they're able to make changes and grow and do something different while still feeling like a continuation. Because I will say, for as all of the problems I have, right, that take this away from being an A+++ movie and make it like probably an A- for me, of like a very good movie that has problems, like, for all of that, if they have a sequel that knocks it out of the park, it will elevate this film. Like, Batman Begins is, as a movie, is like probably a C on its own. Let's be real. But like the strength of the sequels that come after it make that trilogy work. Yeah. Like it is everything to me that it is of a piece with something that is better, and it is better for its sequels. And I hope that happens with this. Like, I hope my love deepens. Right. And grows over time. But they've got to bring the heat. Right. And I think, at risk of like at the 3.5 hour mark, like opening up another can of worms, I want to see him be a detective like he was in this movie, but I want to see a mystery. And like, this movie has, you know, things that we're trying to figure out, but to me is not a mystery. Like, in that we actually see the Riddler do his crime. So like, we know it's a dude in a green suit, right? And like, we don't know his identity, but we don't even know any suspects ahead of time. So it's not like, you know, Death on the Nile or Murder on the Orient Express, where like there are people and we're trying to figure out which person it is, right? It is just like, it's a thriller. We're on this journey with them while they're trying to figure out the reason that this is happening. And that's interesting to me because we get to see him do detective work, but it's not a mystery, right? Yes. Like, I'd love to see that. And it's not to say it needs to be this totally different thing. I want it to be an evolution. I want to see the themes continue and change and evolve and it get more brighter and get more fantastical. And, you know, I want to see them go places.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. 100%. Yeah. On the Star Wars note, you edit this out all you want, but like,
sure.
Do I like each movie? Yes, I do. Do I have problems with each movie? Yes, I do. Do I like the trilogy? Not particularly.
They don't work well together.
Yeah.
It's a problem.
Yeah.
I'm glad we can come together.
No, yeah.
I think we probably agree a lot more on those movies than we do disagree.
Yeah, I think so.
Any other closing thoughts before we go?
just sometime when we're together, I think it'd be interesting to talk about what they did to Thomas Wayne's character and what you think about that. But it doesn't need to be in the
For
show.
sure. Here's the thing. In 6 months or 4 months or whatever, in a while, let's schedule a time for you and me. We'll get together. We'll watch this again on HBO Max, and we'll record right after, live in person. Because I think we have another 4 hours in us on this.
I know.
I'm interested to see if my thoughts evolve with time and if yours evolve with time, and we'll do this again.
Yeah.
All right. That about wraps it up then.
Yeah.
If you like the show, you can leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, recommend us in Overcast, tell your friends about the show, and help us find an audience so we can keep putting out episodes. You can find all of our episodes and show notes at batlessons.com. You can send us comments, questions, or corrections to contact@batlessons.com, or you can tweet at us at batlessons. Until next time, I'm Alex Cash.
And I'm Brian Anders.
Thanks for listening.